Alright guys, let's take a look at quadrilaterals. I know this can get a little tricky, so I thought I'd put this chart on. I think this will help. At the top, it's all quadrilaterals, and all you have to do is have four sides and be a closed shape, or a polygon is what they call them, but it's got to be a four-sided shape. And that's the definition of a quadrilateral, four-sided closed shape. Quadrilaterals then get broken into pieces. So then the next step, it could be a trapezoid, and that just has one set of parallel sides. And they're saying the top and bottom here are parallel. And we talked about parallel lines before. Those are the lines that never intersect. So trapezoids just have to have one set of parallel sides. The others do not. But quadrilaterals also branch off into parallelograms. And by definition, a parallelogram has to have two sets of parallel sides. So if you're looking at this, let me grab a color here. This parallelogram right here, the top and bottom are parallel, and the two sides are parallel. So that's two sets, the green set and the blue set. All of these shapes have two sets of parallel lines. But it can be confusing. They're called parallelograms, but this is a special parallelogram called a square. This is a special parallelogram called a rhombus, and this is a special parallelogram called a rectangle. And what you'll see as you go down this chart is everything becomes more specific, more specialized in their rules. So here's all parallelograms. Now you go down to rectangles, and that's a special type of parallelogram, which is a quadrilateral. So if you see a picture of a rectangle, you technically could call it a parallelogram or a quadrilateral. It has all of the rules of all three of these names. But a rectangle is more specialized than a parallelogram because it's got four right angles and two sets of parallel sides. See, it's got that four right angles. Parallelograms don't have to have that. This is a special kind of parallelogram that has four right angles. Another type of parallelogram is a rhombus. And a rhombus is special because it's got to have, they call them congruent, but it really means equal. And when you're doing geometry, sometimes the drawings you can't really tell without having to actually measure. But IXL does a nice job of showing you. If it has this little line here like this, that means they're all equal. Even if it looks like the drawing's a little bit off, they're all meant to be equal. On a rectangle, it would look like this. See, this one is equal to that one, and this short side is equal to that short side. So these little marks are just to show you that opposite sides are equal. Opposite sides are equal. All four sides are equal. So this parallelogram is a special kind. It's called a rhombus, and it has two sets of parallel lines, just like this one, but it's got one more rule, congruent or equal sides. So if you see a rhombus, you could technically call it a parallelogram and a quadrilateral. Now the last shape we're looking at is the square, and it's the most specialized of all. It's got the most set of directions. So you can see quadrilaterals just have to have four sides. A parallelogram has to have four sides and two sets of parallel lines. But a square has 4 directions on it, 4 specific instructions. So a square has to have congruent sides, which means equal. So all four sides have to be equal for it to be a square. It's got to have 4 right angles, and it's got to have 2 sets of parallel sides. So the top and bottom have to be parallel, and the sides have to be parallel. Now where you're probably getting confused is when you see a picture of a square, you say, geez, Mrs. Spade, that's a square. And I say, you're right. But it's also a rhombus because it follows those rules. It's also a rectangle because it follows those rules. It's also a parallelogram because it follows that rule. It's also a quadrilateral. It's all of these shapes, but it's just a super specialized shape. I'm going to do a couple examples with you, but this chart right here I think is going to help you a ton. Use this first chart. I think that's going to help you the most to kind of come up with how you're going to name these shapes. I hope it helps. So here's a picture. It says pick all the names for this shape. Well, first of all, it is definitely a quadrilateral. For sure, we're circling that one because it's got 4 sides. It's also a parallelogram because the sides are parallel and the top and bottom are parallel, and that's the definition of a parallelogram. It is not a rhombus. And the reason why it's not a rhombus is all four sides are not equal. See that little one? These two are equal and these two are equal. But a rhombus has to have four equal sides. It's also not a rectangle because it doesn't have right angles. But it is a parallelogram and it is a quadrilateral. Again, all right, now this one, most fourth graders would go, Mrs. Spate, really? It's a rectangle. Yes, yes it is. That's the final name you would give it. But it would also fit the rules of a quadrilateral because it's got four sides. Will it fit the rules of a rhombus? No, because a rhombus has to have four equal or congruent sides. Will it fit the rules of a square? No, because again, the square has to have four equal sides. So this one just has two answers. Now this is the most specialized shape, the square. So obviously, you're going, Mrs. Spate, that's easy, it's a square. True, but it's also a rhombus. And remember, the rules of a rhombus are opposite sides are parallel and equal. So it follows the rules of a rhombus. It also follows all the rules of a parallelogram. All four sides, top and bottom, are parallel, sides are parallel. And it follows the rules of a rectangle. So a square really follows the rules of all of these. And I know a fourth grader, though, would just say, hey, it's just a square. That's true, but to know your shapes, you've got to know which ones have similar rules, and a square shares all of these rules. Let's take a look at one more here. Pick all the names for this shape, and let's see here. This one is definitely not a square, definitely not a rhombus, not a rectangle. It's a trapezoid. It doesn't follow all the rules of a square. It doesn't have four equal sides. Doesn't follow the rules of a rhombus with four equal sides. Doesn't have four right angles, just has two. So it can't be a rectangle. It's just a trapezoid.